Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome our witnesses, and I was just joking with a ranking member. She starts her morning with this distinguished panel, and I understand she has dinner later in the night with maybe with Lady Gaga. So that's you're the opening act. How's that? We'll see how that goes. One of my all-time favorite pictures is a picture of Tony Bennett, who died not long ago. There's a great shot of him a couple of years ago with Lady Gaga, and I thought, I want to go up and be just like Tony Bennett, and you may have had that chance. All right, well, good morning, everybody. I call this hearing to order. Today's hearing comes at a time when the topic of interest, of extreme heat, rather, is top of the mind for literally millions of Americans. Just like last week, Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, where we're gathered today, experienced its hottest day on record. Temperatures reached 99 degrees with a heat index between 100 and 105 degrees. That record followed a summer of sweltering heat waves across large parts of our country. For example, Phoenix, Arizona, home to one of our witnesses today, saw a temperature of 110 degrees or hotter every day from June 30th to July 30th. I'm going to say that again. When I read it, I didn't believe it. But Phoenix, Arizona, home to one of our witnesses today, saw temperatures of 110 degrees or hotter every day from June 30th to July 30th, and even hotter days in August. In fact, this summer was our planet's hottest on record, according to data from the European Union Climate Change Service. Extreme heat contributes to dry conditions that make areas more susceptible to wildfires that burn out of control. Just last month, our nation witnessed the heartbreaking loss of lives and businesses due to the unprecedented wildfires in Hawaii. And for years, we've seen the same thing happen across western states, including California, Oregon, and others. Wildfires can have wide-ranging impacts on transportation, from road closures and travel disruptions due to excessive smoke, to the weakening of highways and bridge structures from the heat generated by those fires. These are not unrelated or isolated events. Extreme heat also means warmer oceans, which lead to stronger and more destructive hurricanes. Currently, we're in the middle of an active hurricane season that has already resulted in damaging storms that have unleashed wind, rain, and storm surges in Florida, in the southeast, and on the west coast. My own state of Delaware, coastal storms and flooding have resulted in closure of parts of State Route 1, a major north-south highway in our state, which links communities along our east coast. The frequency, the intensity, the duration of more intense heat waves, wildfires, and extreme weather across the United States have only gotten worse in recent years, due in large part to human-caused climate change. In turn, this has put our nation's transportation infrastructure, our workforce, and our travelers at a greater risk of harm. Extreme heat can impact our transportation infrastructure in many ways. For example, when temperatures reach triple-digit, roadways can buckle, resulting in costly damage that disrupts travel and leads to unsafe road conditions. In fact, it's estimated that the additional road maintenance and replacement costs caused by extreme heat could reach a total cost of $26 billion nationwide by 2040. And it's not just roads and highway infrastructure that experience the effects of extreme heat. High temperatures can cause rail tracks to shift, delaying or slowing rail service, something as a frequent rider on Amtrak between D.C. and Delaware I've experienced just in the last week. The last summer, a commuter train in San Francisco Bay Area derailed when the temperature of the tracks exceeded 140 degrees. When talking about extreme heat, we can't forget that heat's effect on transportation infrastructure directly impacts the people who use it as well as those who build and maintain it. We know that rising temperatures have serious implications for our health. Thousands of people in the United States are hospitalized each year due to health. Many of these hospitalizations are workers who are exposed to dangerously high temperatures on the job. Today, we're going to hear about the impacts that urban heat islands have on the people who live in the cities, including many who live in low income and disadvantaged communities. We will also hear about the hazards faced by our transportation construction workforce, whose jobs require them to be outside, building, repairing our roads, highways, and our bridges, even when temperatures soar to record highs. In the years ahead, extreme heat will continue to threaten our infrastructure and our public health, even as we work to transition toward a cleaner energy future. Fortunately, solutions are available to help transportation agencies better address the effects of extreme heat. Cities like Phoenix, Arizona, and Los Angeles, California are turning to innovative materials, including cooler pavements, which give off less heat than traditional pavements. Communities are also deploying strategies to reduce the urban heat island effect by planting more tree cover to help cool sidewalks and transit stops and reduce the overall heat intensity in dense, highly paved places. In Delaware, we have already planted something, I think, 80,000 trees since the launching of a program, an initiative called Tree for Every Delaware Initiative. And we launched that, I think, in 2020. Proud that our community has taken a leadership role in implementing policies to address extreme heat and weather at the federal level. In the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we created new programs, including the Healthy Streets Program, the Protect Program, and the Neighborhood Access and Equity Program to help states and local governments better address this challenge. And with that, my hope is today's hearing will help to further our committee's understanding of the nexus between extreme heat and transportation. I also hope that our hearing today will bring greater awareness to the work that is being done across our country to address this increasingly urgent problem. Today, we're privileged to be joined by a panel of 3 witnesses who will testify about the many ways in which cities, the labor force, and the private sector are working, and in many ways working together to make our communities more resilient to extreme heat and weather events. And I would say, just before introducing our ranking member, Senator Capito, when we talk about issues like these and extreme weather and extreme weather events, I'm a guy who always looks for opportunity in adversity. Always looks for opportunity in adversity, and that opportunity would include the creation of jobs, good-paying jobs. And that will be part of what as we address these issues today, that I'm always looking for that. How do we create a more nurturing environment for job creation and in all this adversity, and there's a lot of it right now around the planet, how do we somehow grasp and create some economic opportunity and put people to work? With that, I'm delighted to be sitting next to Senator Capito, as I do often, and to turn this over to her. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling for today's hearing and for your ongoing commitment to bipartisanship in the committee's business. I also want to give a warm welcome to our committee witnesses, and I understand one of my fellow native West Virginians, Mr. Parsons, who's from Fort Ashby, West Virginia. Thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. If we look back at the first 8 months of 2023, our country has confronted several types of disasters. We've seen catastrophic floods in California and Vermont, tornadoes in Arkansas and Mississippi, violent hailstorms in Texas, a hurricane made landfall in Florida, flash floods in my home state of West Virginia, and those horrible massive fires in Hawaii. The consequences of extreme weather are felt in both urban and rural communities year-round, with the many challenges that our states face in improving their transportation infrastructure. I'm very proud of this committee's bipartisan work to provide them with funding they need to address these challenges in the IIJA. And as with varied extreme weather events show, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to addressing infrastructure and resiliency. As my colleagues have heard me said many times, maintaining flexibility within the federal aid highway program is absolutely crucial to ensuring that states can tackle their own unique transportation needs head-on. I'm pleased that the programs and policies we established in the IIJA have adhered to this principle. So as we continue with the oversight of the implementation of the IIJA, I will work to ensure that states retain that flexibility provided to them within the law. One of the IIJA's new programs that is especially relevant in today's hearing is the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, or the PROTECT program. As the acronym suggests, this program provides a renewed focus on improving the resiliency of our transportation infrastructure to withstand extreme weather. Specifically, it gives formula funding to all states and directs the Secretary of Transportation to also award competitive grants to eligible entities. The funding can be used to carry out planning activities, build evacuation routes, and reinforce existing highways and bridges, among other eligible uses. The program is important because it is a new tool we have to ensure we are preparing for the future and not just responding to the aftermath of extreme weather. To do otherwise would be a failure in our stewardship of federal taxpayer dollars and could delay timely disaster response and recovery efforts. I note earlier that the PROTECT program places a renewed focus on resiliency. That is because resiliency is not a new consideration for states and other non-federal partners as they design and construct highways and bridges to best serve our citizens. Infrastructure owners were already incorporating resiliency into asset management strategies, planning documents, and project development. I'm glad to see that the work that we did in the IIJA is furthering these efforts. As we were developing the IIJA, one of my other policy priorities was improving the environmental review and permitting process. I'm pleased that we were successful in that area. The IIJA included a robust set of provisions to make this process more efficient without sacrificing environmental protections, and included codifying the one federal decision policy for surface transportation projects. Our ability to prepare for, respond, and recover from extreme weather is directly related to whether states can get their projects through the morass of the federal environmental review process and secure the necessary permitting approvals. Faced with challenges like extreme weather, we cannot afford to have a process that adds years to project timelines and drives up costs, especially given the current inflationary environment. This issue continues to be an area of focus for me. I was pleased to see that further improvements to the project delivery process were included in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. However, I am troubled that the administration is not faithfully implementing that law and instead seems intent on adding more hurdles to infrastructure permitting. Recently, the CEQ proposed Phase 2 of its NEPA implementing regulations, which they advertise as implementing the Fiscal Responsibility Act provisions. But additional changes in that proposal, which have no textual basis in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, seek to transform environmental reviews from information gathering processes into tools that slow projects that the administration does not support. And many times, they don't support because of political reasons. The administration is proposing to layer on political bias and favor certain types of projects at the expense of others. I hope that the administration corrects course on these issues based on stakeholder feedback and adheres to the FRA's plain text. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the on-the-ground efforts to address the effects of extreme weather on our transportation infrastructure. I thank the chairman again, and I yield back my time.
You bet. Thank you, Senator Capito. I think next I'm going to take a moment to introduce each of our witnesses, and then we'll lead off with David Handula. Has anybody ever mispronounced your name, Mr. Handula? Never? All right, we'll try not to do that today. But I'm going to lead off witness today is Dr. David Handula, who is the director of the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation for the city of Phoenix, Arizona. Have you always lived in Arizona?
10 years, Senator.
Okay. All right. And in his current role, Dr. Handula helps coordinate and implement programs to protect people from dangerous summer heat and improve their quality of life. He's a member of the American Meteorological Society Board of Environment and Health, and a faculty member at ASU. My wife is a graduate of ASU, Appalachian State University. The other ASU is, there you go. But anyway, she longs to be a graduate of, well, no, probably she's happy to be a proud mountaineer. But anyway, Dr. Handula is a member of the American Meteorological Society's Board of, as I said, Environment and Health, and a faculty member at ASU School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. Dr. Handula also has authored more than 90 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and technical reports related to extreme health, public health, and urban climatology. Earned a PhD in environmental sciences from the University of Virginia in 2013. Where'd you grow up?
In New Jersey, Senator.
Okay, all right. Next, we're going to hear from Travis Parsons, who is the Director of Occupational Safety and Health for the Laborers' Health and Safety Fund of North America. Mr. Parsons has over 25 years of experience working in safety and has worked in the Laborers' Health and Safety Fund of, worked at the Laborers' Health and Safety Fund of North America since, what, 2002, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. In addition to his work for laborers, he's vice president for the labor division of the National Safety Council, where he sits on the board of directors, among other leadership positions. Mr. Parsons is a native of West Virginia. Tell us where you were born in West Virginia.
A little small town called Fort Ashby, West Virginia, over in the Eastern Panhandle.
All right, good. I know you've heard of that more than a few times. Probably been there more than a few times. But a native of West Virginia, graduate of West Virginia University, who played Penn State in football a week or two ago, right?
Ouch.
And the next week, Penn State played the University of Delaware. A really big ouch.
Yeah, and we actually played three Pennsylvania teams in a row. We played Duquesne last week, and we played Pitt this coming weekend.
Yeah, we have Duquesne coming to Delaware for a matchup in a week or so. I told the president of University of Delaware, don't schedule Penn State again. Once is enough. But Mr. Parsons, football aside, we're delighted that you're here today. Last but not least, we'll hear from Dr. Amy Flannery, who is Global Principal for Transportation Risk Resilience at Jacobs Solutions and Technologies. Dr. Flannery has an extensive background in researching, developing, and implementing projects and policies to improve the resilience of our nation's transportation infrastructure. Previously, she has held positions at the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Applied Engineering Management Corporation, and for a time was an associate professor at George Mason University, not too far from here. Dr. Flannery earned her PhD in civil engineering from Penn State.
Apparently the infamous Penn State.
Well, we're glad to see you, and I understand she's a mother of at least one daughter who's sitting over her left shoulder, and we're just watching your daughter to see if her lips move when you speak, so we'll see. But we welcome all of you. We thank each of you for your willingness to testify before our committee today. We're now pleased to hear your testimony, starting with Dr. Handula. Dr. Handula, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Senators. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Capito and Senator Kelly for the invitation to join you today. It's an honor to be here with my fellow witnesses to share what we're learning about how to manage and mitigate heat in the hottest large city in the country, Phoenix, Arizona. As the chairman noted, this summer has been an especially challenging one for us. We set a new record with 55 days total of those temperatures of 110 degrees or higher. All across the country, local governments like ours have begun to recognize that there are serious deficiencies in planning for, mitigating, and managing extreme heat. In an effort to address this gap, the City of Phoenix launched the nation's first publicly funded local government office focused on heat, the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation that I'm proud to lead. Our new office works with many local partners to coordinate and improve programs that help protect people from the dangers of heat and ensure that our city's communities are cooler, safer, and more comfortable. Improving our city's resilience to extreme heat requires that we engage across all levels of government and across all sectors of society. And it requires us to significantly invest in communities that have been historically underserved. These are communities that have older transportation assets that are more likely to be strained by the heat. Communities where people have fewer transportation options and often must walk in the heat. And these are communities that simply have fewer trees and less shade, places we might call shade deserts. I'd like to share some examples from Phoenix that highlight how we're working to address heat challenges in the transportation sector. And you might be aware, Senators, that the transportation sector contributes to making our cities hotter for several reasons. One of those reasons is that the transportation sector uses a lot of land. Pavement accounts for more than 30% of the land area of Phoenix, and pavement is a significant contributor to urban heat due to its low reflectivity of solar energy. The City of Phoenix is a national leader in the testing and implementation of technologies that alter that reflectivity, the reflectivity of the road surfaces, through our Cool Pavement program. This program has now reached more than 100 miles of city streets that have received a light gray solar reflective coating. The city and Arizona State University have been collaborating to produce an independent, rigorous, and open evaluation of the Cool Pavement program. And we found that the coating is highly effective at reducing the road surface temperature, the temperature you would feel if you put your hand directly on it. That temperature has been reduced by up to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. With this reduction, the underlying asphalt itself experiences less thermal strain, so the coating may reduce long-term asphalt maintenance needs and costs. We also need to think critically about how heat impacts the experience of our transportation users. Residents tell us all the time that heat impacts decisions they make about where they will go and how they will get there, and these decisions, of course, in turn impact commerce, labor, education, healthcare access, and so much more. Phoenix is accelerating its investments to make more shade available for transportation users. One investment is called our Cool Corridors initiative, through which we are striving to achieve 200 miles in the city with at least 60% shade coverage for pedestrians. Phoenix is continuing to closely monitor all federal funding opportunities to scale up and accelerate our ability to address heat through the transportation sector. And we're so appreciative of federal resources included in the IRA and bipartisan infrastructure law to help us do so. The city worked with Senator Kelly to create the Healthy Streets program in the BIL, which could fund, for example, cool pavement projects. Phoenix has also applied to the EPA's Government-to-Government Environmental Justice Grant Program that was created in the IRA. Our proposal there is to create a model cool corridor in a shade desert in South Phoenix. This cool corridor would integrate a wide range of cooling features, including shade and freely accessible chilled drinking water that would more fully support neighborhood mobility and connectivity. Shade and heat mitigation elements are also included in Phoenix's 2022 RAISE Award and our recent proposal to the Protect Grant Program. We respectfully ask that the federal agencies and Congress continue to work to ensure that formula and discretionary programs include heat response and heat mitigation initiatives as project eligibilities. What's especially important to us is that the notices of funding opportunities and project evaluation criteria clearly and appropriately acknowledge how heat-related initiatives can be competitive for funding. Moving forward, continued work to integrate heat planning and thinking across all scales of government, sectors, and agencies will be critical to help pursue community health and prosperity. Our experience in Phoenix is that our transportation infrastructure and systems are very important focal points as we work to build a more weather-ready and heat-ready nation. Thank you.
Dr. Ndul, thanks. Thank you so much for leading us off. Mr. Parsons, you're recognized. 5 minutes. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here this morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chairman Carper, and Ranking Member Capito, and esteemed members of the committee. As pointed out, I am proudly to serve as the Director of Occupational Safety and Health for the Labor's Health and Safety Fund of North America. From here forward, I'll just say Labor's because that's a mouthful. We serve LIUNA and its memberships, which is the Labor's International Union of North America, their employers, their statutory employers, and affiliates. I'm also a proud member of LIUNA Local 11, which is DC, Maryland, Virginia, or some people refer to it as the DMV, not having nothing to do with motor vehicles. My primary areas of expertise and focus are industrial hygiene, hazard awareness and correction, ergonomics, infection control, and overall job site safety. It was pointed out by Senator Capito that I am from a small town in West Virginia originally in the Eastern Panhandle, although I've lived here for 21 years in DC and I'm raising my family here. Being from that small town in West Virginia, that instills in me a deep concern for the well-being of blue-collar workers and especially for their safety and health on the job at the workplace. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address this vital issue of heat that affects our country's workforce and health and safety of its laborers. I'll start with a little description around the problem, and Senator Carper did a very good job, and Chairman Carper, about framing this, so I'll try to be brief. Nationwide, we face a sobering reality that far too many workers lose their lives every year due to extreme heat, and many more are suffering from heat-related illnesses and injuries, some chronic. The urgency of this issue cannot be overstated. Extreme heat is on the rise, with record-breaking heat waves affecting millions of Americans every year. It is an alarming trend. For every degree Celsius increase in temperatures leads to 1% rise in workplace injuries. That is 1% doesn't sound like much, but that's a very significant concern when we have over 160 million workers in this country. So that's a lot of people affected by heat. Just last month, as Chairman pointed out, we witnessed grappling heat in Hawaii, devastating wildfires, Louisiana declaring a heat emergency, and tropical storms reaching unprecedented locations such as California, Texas, and Puerto Rico. It is evident that extreme weather and heat are becoming an unfortunate and enduring reality. Despite the alarming images of hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, it is essential to note that extreme heat claims more lives than any other weather-related phenomenon. The symptoms of heat stress can strike suddenly, often unnoticed, and it's too late to intervene. Prevention is the strongest defense. Prolonged exposure to elevated temperatures strains the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, and they lead to chronic health conditions. I just read recently in my research it's also being tied to respiratory problems that go along with the environmental problems that wildfires cause and with the heat. Survivors of severe heat-related illnesses bear long-term health burdens, including muscle and organ damage, chronic kidney disease, and exacerbation of pre-existing conditions such as diabetes and cardiac disease. Now let's just talk a little bit about the cost. The economic impact of extreme heat is profound. Employers' failure to implement basic heat safety measures costs our economy hundreds of billions of dollars every year. That's both in direct and indirect costs. These costs encompass absenteeism, reduced productivity, worker turnover, overtime cost, increased workers' compensation premiums, liability expenses, and equipment damage due to a rise in workplace incidents. Some may argue that providing additional rest breaks increases payroll expenses for employers. However, safer working conditions mean fewer injuries and illnesses, resulting in lower health care costs, reduced workers' comp claims, and less lost time from work. The old adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure rings true to me when I think of these numbers. Investing in heat-related illness prevention outweighs the cost of neglecting it. Increased breaks not only protect workers from heat stress, but also enhances productivity, saving employers money in the long run. The notion of a conflict between worker safety and business profitability is a false dichotomy. Ensuring that heat hazard safety measures are in place in the workplace is in everyone's best interest. Who faces the burden when you think about heat and a lot of these weather-related incidents? I think of the workers. Some of the workers out there, especially blue-collar workers. Some of the most affected workers include those in construction, landscaping, and road work, members of LIUNA. It's imperative that we improve the tracking of heat-related illness, of injuries of heat-related illness and the impact on our workforce. Tragically, low-income workers and workers of color bear the brunt of these consequences. In construction alone, African-American workers experience heat-related deaths at a rate 51% higher than average, and the death rate for Mexican-born workers is a staggering 91% higher. Workers' physical and mental capacities decline significantly as heat and humidity rise. Research reveals that worker productivity drops 3% per every degree Celsius when it's above 75 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of Celsius and Fahrenheit there. In the end, it's not about the temperature scales. It's about protecting workers. Now I kind of want to talk about some solutions. We possess the knowledge, the science, and background to mitigate heat-related illness in this country. While many employers adopt these strategies, regrettably, not all do. Embracing the mantra of water, rest, shade is a strong place to start. These measures, which are well documented and easy to implement, reduce the risk of heat-related incidents. Workers require access to cool drinking water and adequate cool-down breaks in shaded, air-conditioned areas. And you want to ask what temperature, 80 degrees and below in these areas of breaks. Moreover, the implementation of worker acclimatization protocols, such as a comprehensive written program, training for supervisors and frontline workers, emergency response procedures, and diligent record keeping are all vital components of a comprehensive heat-related illness prevention program. The right to a safe workplace is a fundamental human right, and exposure to excessive heat is one of the most pressing hazards facing workers today. Tens of thousands of workers suffer from heat illness, injuries, and fatalities yearly in the United States, and employers bear the responsibility to protect those workers. The people who build this nation, provide our food, and deliver essential goods deserve every safeguard available. In conclusion, it is past time to protect workers from heat-related illness, injury, and death. We must act decisively. The burden of occupational health-related illness on the economy is substantial and growing. Neglecting these hazards of excessive heat for workers carries significant financial consequences for employers. Thank you for your attention and commitment to addressing this pressing issue. I am open to any questions and discussions you may have on this critical matter.
Mr. Parsons, thanks very much for that testimony. Before we introduce and turn to Dr. Flannery, my maternal grandmother lived, and her husband, my grandfather, lived right outside of Beckley in a little town called Beaver, also known as Daniels, right by Shady Springs High School. And my grandmother, I remember when we were little kids, we'd go back and visit in the summer. And one of my grandmother's favorite sayings was, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." And we were just like little kids, and we were just wondering what she was talking about. But it's finally come clear to me the wisdom of my grandmother and her husband, frankly, as well. So I just had to give her a shout out for introducing me to that phrase a long time ago. A lot of wisdom there. All right, Dr. Flannery, you're on, and your daughter's here watching over your shoulders, so I know you'll be at your best.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Carper and Ranking Member Capito, the members of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. My name is Amy Flannery, and I'm the Global Principal of Transportation Risk and Resilience for Jacobs Solutions. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today as you examine the effects of extreme heat and weather on transportation systems and how the private industry are helping our community partners. I would also like to thank the American Council of Engineering Companies for their leadership in making my testimony possible. As mentioned, my career to date has provided me the opportunity to serve as an educator for tomorrow's civil engineers at George Mason University, where I was a tenured member of the faculty. I have also worked for a small woman-owned business, have been a business owner myself, and have the privilege of working at U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of Research, in the Office of the Secretary prior to joining Jacobs. As America's largest engineering firm, Jacobs is investing in people and technology to address resilience challenges alongside communities across the nation. My experience incorporating climate change or climate resilience began a decade ago this week while working for the Colorado Department of Transportation. In September of 2013, a stalled cold front clashed with a warm monsoonal air mass from the south and dropped 20 inches of rain on northern Colorado. The extensive rainfall and duration resulted in flow surges damaging and destroying major sections of roadway, along with access bridges and retaining walls. Many residents were cut off with no access out of the Big Thompson River Canyon. The operational response involved over 19,000 evacuation and 2,000 air rescues. The event resulted in 9 deaths and caused nearly $4 billion in damages to public and private infrastructure, including damages to 50 major bridges and 485 miles of roadway. Changes to the FHWA Emergency Relief Program in May of 2013, just prior to the September floods, allowed Colorado Department of Transportation to pursue more resilient designs to address major damage to some of their facilities. One specific area, known as Horseshoe Curve on the US 34 corridor, was destroyed by flooding in 2013 and had been previously destroyed by flash flooding in 1976. These changes to the Emergency Relief Program allowed for a final design that provides for a more resilient corridor with access for first responders during emergency events, and it is anticipated to minimize damage from similar future events. In 2013, addressing extreme weather events and climate stressors were just emerging as a new area of concern within the highway industry. Today, nearly 2 years since the passage of IIJA, and the transportation industry has, for the first time, dedicated funding to address resilience from natural hazards. The PROTECT program alone provides over $8 billion in formula and grant funding opportunities for proactive management of system vulnerabilities. State agencies and their partners have been working diligently to develop resilience improvement plans and prioritize lists of projects for their highway systems. We at Jacobs are pleased to be working with several states represented here on the committee, including Delaware, West Virginia, and Maryland, on their resilience improvement plans. A few challenges that I've heard from professionals that I work with include the need to increase training for their staff to understand awareness of resilient strategies, to better understand economic assessment methodologies for resilient design alternatives, to better understand best practices for incorporating resilience into design, and to better understand federal aid requirements of new programs. Incorporating climate resilience into our standard practice has yet to be fully integrated, but change is happening. To that end, the future transportation reauthorization efforts from this committee to spur the incorporation of resilience into practice could include supporting the industry to better understand risk tolerance and what is an acceptable level of resilience for the range of facilities that our industry maintains. These criteria may support potential changes to design standards and material specifications to address climate resilience in the future. As a former educator, the need to integrate infrastructure resilience into our undergraduate and graduate degree programs is also necessary to ensure that the next generation of transportation engineers and planners are well-versed in these concepts. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll start it off and then yield to Senator Capito, but I think it was a 2021 study that found that taking a proactive approach to adapting U.S. roads and roadways to climate change could save the economy up to $470 billion with a B, dollars annually by the year 2100. As I've said more than a few times in this room, climate change is an issue we can no longer afford to ignore. I think most people bought into that. And that means investing in our transportation infrastructure and making upgrades to protect against extreme heat and weather before infrastructure is damaged, rather than just continuing to make the same repairs over and over again. Start off with a question for Dr. Handula. Would you please describe for us how Phoenix is taking a proactive rather than a reactive approach to extreme heat?
Thank you for the question, Senator Carper, Chairman Carper. I think it's critical to be proactive in our efforts to prepare, and that preparation really shows up at the minutia of operating local government, in the procurement processes, in our negotiations, in our engagement with industry, thinking about how products work, what the product design specifications are. Just to give you one example from Phoenix. In our city, we're concerned about the impact of heat on the electronic systems in the field that operate our traffic systems and streetlights, and that might include diminished lifetimes from LED bulbs. Our traffic signal controller cabinets have fans in them that provide some cooling. We need to be, when we're shopping for products on the market, building procurement process, we need to be sure that heat is a factor in that process.
All right. So as a follow-up, are there any key lessons learned for other cities about the benefits and challenges to proactive adaptation?
Chairman Carper, thank you. It's an excellent question. Unfortunately, I think we're still very much in the early stages of learning what it means to build heat-resilient communities. Phoenix, as I noted, is at the forefront of deploying cool pavement technology. So we are learning as we go, as we've deployed 100 miles, where it's most successful.
Let me just interrupt. 100 miles out of how many miles? Is it
many thousands. Okay. So just a small fraction
right.
so far.
But it's a start.
It absolutely is a start. Learning which products bond correctly to the road material, what any trade-offs might be in terms of pedestrian thermal comfort or safety. I think all of our communities across the country are still learning how to become more heat resilient, and I think an important role the federal government is beginning to play and can continue to play is convening cities together to share what we're learning and ensure that we're applying best practices as quickly as possible. As you noted, there's a strong sense of urgency to ensure we're ahead of the game here.
All right, good. Thank you. A question, if I could, for Mr. Parsons. Mr. Parsons, as you described in your own testimony just a few minutes ago, transportation worker productivity decreases significantly as heat levels increase. Transportation agencies, transportation contractors, and labor organizations all have a stake in finding solutions to ensure that the construction workforce can continue to safely and efficiently do their jobs, building and maintaining our nation's roads, our highways, and our bridges. Question. Would you please elaborate on what your union is doing to work collaboratively with the private sector, with government agencies and other stakeholders to respond to the effects of extreme heat on construction workers?
Yes, thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. And so we work collectively. So we're a Labor Management Cooperation Fund, so we work with our signatory contractors for worker training. We visit job sites, help contractors write programs, especially small and medium-sized contractors. So that's one way we help, is by assisting our signatory employers. We also work on a federal level nationwide on worker advocacies for better protections for workers with every agency that plays in the worker safety and health space. whatever agency affects workers, whether it's federal highway, federal OSHA, EPA, we work hand in hand with them to increase protection for workers on our jobs.
Okay, thank you. A question now, if I could, for, I think it could be for Dr. Handula or Dr. Flannery. Dr. Flannery, why don't you take a first shot at it, okay? I'm proud that this committee, our committee, has played a leading role in the enactment of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, both of which include new authorities to help make our transportation system more resilient to extreme heat and extreme weather. Would you, Dr. Flannery, would you please take a moment to discuss how programs like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Healthy Streets program and so forth, the RAISE grant program, describe for you, if you will, how these programs and others will help states, will help transportation agencies, and local governments take more proactive action to make their transportation infrastructure more resilient to hazards like extreme heat and flooding.
So the one thing that the PROTECT program does provide is, for the first time, dedicated funding to address things like extreme heat and extreme weather events. For years, we've known as an industry that we've needed to address these things, but we have a very big system that is aging, and so there's lots of need and potentially not a lot of dedicated funding. So the PROTECT program does provide, for the first time, dedicated funding and has spurred within the agencies a need to begin to address resilience. So understanding where their vulnerabilities are and beginning to address those with prioritized list of projects.
I'm going to yield now to Senator Capito and Senator Mullen as well. I think we have Senator, one of our senators from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is on his way here, and we look forward to his arrival, and others as well. When we come back, Dr. Handula, I'm going to ask the same question that Dr. Flannery has answered. I'm going to turn to you and ask that question. But for now, Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Flannery, I mentioned in my opening statement how important I think to not have a one-size-fits-all regulatory environment coming down from federal highways. You mentioned in your opening statement that a variety of states, that you're one of which is my home state, that you've seen action on. How important is it to retain that? To reject that one-size-fits-all and give the flexibility that each state needs. I mean, obviously, West Virginia's needs are not the same as Arizona as he tells the story. So how important is that?
Sure, happy to answer. So one of the challenges with a one-size-fits-all is I think it limits our understanding of the range of threats that do affect highway assets. For example, we talked about things that happen in Colorado with extreme rainfall and monsoonal air masses. Those aren't quite the same threats that would affect, like, the state of Florida, for example, where we worry a lot about hurricanes and sea level rise. So understanding the range of threats that affect assets is really important, and they vary greatly across the country. But also understanding the maturity of data systems within agencies. So some agencies are a little bit further ahead of the curve, some are a little bit behind. And so having sort of a very rigid program might be challenging for those who aren't quite ready to jump into the boat with fully to embrace the program. So I think flexibility is very important.
As you're seeing now as the PROTECT program's rolling out, are you finding that the flexibility is in that program?
Yes, I think so.
Good. Let me ask this question. How can, as you see, you just mentioned this, that state DOTs are tackling this in different ways and at different rates of speed. How could they focus on to get their efforts to move forward more quickly, and how can the Federal Highways Administration help them with that?
So the one thing that we do benefit from as an industry is Federal Highway and the Transportation Research Board and AASHTO have been aware of this challenge that we have to our system and have been developing guidance and research over the past several years on the topic. Now we're into the point with the dedicated funding sources to actually become into implementation. So we're seeing the hiring of new staff, we're seeing the expanded duties of staff to begin to address resilience. And I think that is helping tremendously for states to begin to accelerate implementation. And so they're looking for opportunities, in particular in West Virginia, for example, we're looking at opportunities throughout the life cycle of projects and throughout the agency to actually engage staff with these resilience concepts. So whether it be maintenance and operations all the way through to design, there's an opportunity to engage and to include resilience in those decision making.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Handula, let me ask you, I was interested to hear about the cool pavement and you described that in your opening statement. Just curious, like, how are these how do you think they're going to be reapplied? And, it's a new concept, I guess. Are you just doing it experimentally, or are you planning to expand that?
Yeah, thanks, Senator Capito. As I noted, we've been very proud of our work to evaluate the Cool Pavement program with university researchers. But as you note, we still are in the early stages. Our street transportation department would say that we have moved beyond the pilot stage. We've seen sufficient success in terms of how the material is bonding to the road surface, how residents are perceiving, how it's performing in real-world conditions, which we can't learn from a laboratory. So we have upgraded it into a full-scale program, but we are continuing to learn about how well it will perform over time. One concern, for example, is that the reflectivity will degrade as cars drive on the surface, as it weathers. We need to learn more.
You mean it wears down?
It will become less reflective as it becomes dirty. Just if we,
see.
same if we put a piece of paper on the road, it would become dirty as well. So we need to understand how the long-term performance evolves to know what the right scale of investment is, at what pace, and see if we are achieving those cost savings that are possible with the reduced thermal wear and tear of the asphalt.
Well, keep us up on that. That's very interesting. Mr. Parsons, you did a good job describing the challenges of the heat on our workers, and I think that we want to make sure we have as many laborers working as possible, and one of the ways to do that in safe and healthy conditions. One of the ways we can do that, I think, is to get permitting reform, which I mentioned in my opening statement. I know that you all, as an organization, have been supportive of permitting reform. I didn't know if you wanted to make a statement on that in terms of how it impacts the number of workers and how many workers are actually engaged. Since we have these permit delays, is this an area of concern for you?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator Capito. Absolutely. Permitting, while important, should never get in the way of progress. And we are all about workers going to work safely and also workers going to work as soon as they can. Shovels in the ground, rub them on the road. So we never want to see permitting get in the way of progress or active work. And as a matter of fact, I've actually seen permitting get in the way of some safety interventions on roadways. I'll give you a prime example. Everybody knows what a Jersey barrier is, a concrete barrier on a road that protect workers from the traveling public. That'll be spec'd in, it'll be paid for, even in a low bid environment in federal highway system. And then permitting will come through and take it out. And there's workers out there exposed to hazards because of that permitting. So
wow.
Absolutely, anything we can do to streamline permitting, although sometimes important, especially for safety. As long as it's safe out there and we can streamline it and not hold things up, absolutely, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Senator. We're joined by Senator Fetterman and our neighbor to the north from Delaware. Delaware and Pennsylvania used to be the same state, and we gave them their independence about 200 years ago. And they seem to have done pretty well since then, and then, too well when it comes to playing football. All right, Senator Fetterman, you're recognized. Welcome aboard.
I'm deeply concerned for the welfare of our transportation workforce in Pennsylvania, of course. Mr. Parsons, these workers are forced to work in an extreme heat without federal safety standards. What lessons can we take from the states that have set heat standards or those that have eliminated worker protections?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Mr. Senator. And what I'll say to that is we need codified heat protections across the country. There's only, in this whole country, I think there's 44 states that do not have a federal OSHA rule. There's 6 states that have somewhat a version of it, and there's 3 that have a permanent rule. So without mentioning all those states and messing that up, California kind of set the way a long time ago. And Oregon and Washington State jumped on board last year after the extreme weather and heat-related conditions. So we like those rules in place. We like them codified best practices. And so in the construction world, unfortunately, there's a lot of good actors out there that do the right thing, fortunately. But unfortunately, the sometimes smaller contractors either don't have the means or the ways to implement programs unless they absolutely have to. So We have to set the standard straight across the board, have codified rules for everyone, and have minimum criteria to base our worker protections on.
Thank you. You know, of course, extreme weather events, particularly flooding for our transportation infrastructure in Pennsylvania is really wreaking havoc. You know, Dr. Flannery, can you walk us through why it is so important that states and agencies have a consistent source of federal emergency relief funding that they know it will be there into the future?
Thank you, Senator. So one of the things that, that agencies need in terms of the emergency relief program, and some of the changes I mentioned earlier in my opening have allowed for the use of resilient designs post-disaster. So we've seen changes within the ER program that have been very beneficial, and I think states are doing the best that they can with the limited dollars that they have to address the needs of their systems through their asset management programs, but sometimes they just don't have the ability to get to those needs before these major events occur. So continual funding of the FHWA Emergency Relief Program is essential to maintain system operations.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I cede my remaining time. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Mullins.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody for being here.
Mullen, not
You said
Mullen.
Mullins?
I said Mullins. I'm sorry.
I've been called a lot worse.
Mullen.
Look at social media. It gets ugly. Anyways, appreciate the correcting that, but I didn't even paid attention. Dr. Flannery, first of all, thank you for being here too, and sure appreciate your expertise in this. In your testimony, you mentioned the importance of state DOTs maintaining flexibility to accomplish greater returns on infrastructure investments that cater to unique transportation needs. I mean, as we know, one size doesn't fit all, right? What's good for New York maybe isn't actually the best idea for states like Oklahoma. And can you give us a few examples of projects that you have worked on to improve resiliency and as a result has withstood the extreme weather for specific designs?
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit about a project that we did actually in Colorado. We had a major rock slide event that occurred on the I-70 corridor that shut down the corridor for nearly 2 weeks. So one of the things that we did working with Federal Highway Administration and the Colorado Department of Transportation was to look for resilient alternatives. So how could we avoid this type of shutdown of a major interstate east-west corridor in the state of Colorado in the future? So we researched and investigated. There was some new technology in terms of rockfall netting that was available. There were some other things that we could do in terms of monitoring and just making the public aware should these events occur in the future in terms of warning devices. So working with FHWA and the division office in Colorado, as well as the Colorado Department of Transportation, we work to ensure that in the future, events are hopefully avoided, and if they do occur, that we can clear them quickly and reopen the facility.
What year was that?
I'm sorry?
What year was that, rock slide?
It
They
was
shut down I-70?
I-70 in Glenwood Springs area.
Yeah, what year was that, though?
That would have been 2016, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, excuse me, I don't know what's going on. I think you're correct because I got stuck in that. And we got rerouted and had to go way around through the canyon.
Yes.
And then we had to go through a game refuge or a national park. And it was an absolute mess. I was pulling a trailer too, and so that even made it worse.
Not fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you getting that fixed for us. Streamlining infrastructure projects is obviously it's a must. It's not a need; it's a must. And if we want to integrate infrastructure resiliency into our nation's transportation sector, to do this, there's obviously it's imperative for the state DOTs to provide information that's required for them. And if I understand it correctly from our state DOT, that information isn't always easy to access. Would you agree with that?
As I mentioned in my opening, I was a professor at George Mason University, and one of the things that I think our industry desperately needs is the continual training of staff. So, for example, I went to school nearly 30 years ago. I was not taught about climate resilience. I did not teach climate resilience when I taught at George Mason University. So we have a whole bunch of practitioners that are 10, 20, 30 years out of school who never heard these concepts. So working with organizations like ASCE, for example, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the Transportation Research Board, FHWA, and training outlets is really important. You know, they hear the term, they recognize the need for it, but what does that mean when you put it into practice, I think is still a little bit of a gap. And we're working on that, and there's lots of training available, but it's going to take a bit for it to kind of make its way down through the layers of staff and those that can actually impact resilience.
Well, this is me being a politician. You don't look like you was in school that long ago. I mean, your daughter's way too young for that. So, see, that was me being a good politician there. Yeah. Hey, going back to that, is there something that Congress needs to do to maybe enact? Is there legislation? Is there an understanding we need to put into a bill? Is there something we can help with that?
So I fall back on this term that I use, models, metrics, and methods. And so I often say to people, if I say to you, make something more safe, what does that mean? And in our world, that means fewer crashes. If I say to you, make something more resilient, you kind of know what I mean, like don't fail and recover quickly. But what does that mean in terms of design, or in terms of operations, or in terms of maintenance practices? So we don't yet have standard methods to sort of address resilience or fold it into design. We don't quite fully understand what resilience investments do in terms of return on investment. So things like fundamental research to understand how assets perform under a range of threats would be really ideal. The development of understanding of risk tolerance and what is the acceptable level of resilience on the range of systems that we operate is also something that I think could be helpful for the industry.
Great. Thank you so much.
Dr. Flannery, when I was in my round of questions, my last question, I directed a question to Dr. Handula, and I said that when it was my turn again, I was going to ask the same question of you, but both of you mentioned the PROTECT program that we created in Congress in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I think Dr. Handula, you also mentioned the Healthy Streets program and the RAISE grant program as well. So my question, Dr. Flannery, is, would you just take a moment as well to discuss how these programs and others will help states, transportation agencies, and local governments take more proactive action to make their transportation infrastructure more resilient to hazards like extreme heat and flooding?
For the past several years, state departments of transportation have been implementing asset management programs and performance management programs. They've begun to look at climate resilience along those lines of how long can assets last? Are they deteriorating more quickly? Do we need to repair them, after extreme events and things like that? The PROTECT program, the thing that it does is provides a dedicated stream of funding. So states are now a little bit more comfortable thinking about how might I address resilience from soup to nuts, from planning all the way through design. They see that there's an opening in terms of continual funding. There's an opportunity to make the investments that they've known about, but maybe didn't necessarily have the funding to actually dedicate at the time. So they're very excited about it. I actually just left a conference of 25 state DOT representatives on the topic of resilience in Wilmington, Delaware, and headed back to
When was that? When were you in Wilmington?
Last night, and I'm heading back tonight.
Me too.
So they're very excited, and the enthusiasm within the industry is very palatable and very fun to actually be a part of the industry right now.
That's great. Thank you. Let me turn to Mr. Parsons again, if I could. In your testimony, you talked about the burden of extreme heat on transportation workers and the fact that many of the workers, folks that you and others represent, come from low-income and in some cases disadvantaged communities. These construction workers are on the front lines of adapting our transportation system to extreme heat events. And yet in doing so, they're also bearing the burden of extreme heat on their own health and well-being. Question, what type of health impacts from extreme heat are you seeing on transportation construction workforce? What are some of the effective strategies for addressing these negative impacts?
Yeah, so some of them I mentioned lead to chronic diseases, but the more immediate effect is what's called, heat stroke. You don't want to get, we've all heard of heat exhaustion and we've all experienced dehydration, but if a worker gets to heat stroke, it's usually too late. So oftentimes the symptoms aren't there. So we need to put in place requirements to have something as simple as water, rest, and shade. What I mean by that is so much water per hour, a place to take a break, mandatory breaks at least 15 minutes every 2 hours. And that break area should be shaded, and it should also have some kind of cooling mechanism, whether you're inside or outside. It doesn't do any good if it's not cool there. So the types of injuries you experience are exacerbation of people that already have existing like diabetes. It affects your heart, it affects your kidneys because of dehydration. So that answers the first part of your question. But just you'd think it's human rights on the job, but in today's world, we just don't have that for all workers. And when it comes to the low-income workers or other workers of color, oftentimes they are also placed in the most dangerous jobs, and they don't speak up for themselves. They may or may not be documented workers. They may be lower paid. So they're worried about losing their jobs more than anybody. So they don't speak up for safety on the job is another reason why they're more vulnerable.
All right, thank you for that. Dr. Handula, I want to come back to you for my next question. Based on your experience in running the first municipal office in the country, I believe, dedicated to addressing heat, what advice would you have for other cities that are struggling with extreme heat and are looking for solutions?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Carper. I think our experience is that it's critical within the structure of local government and arguably other scales to clearly articulate where the leadership is in the organization for heat, which department and which people there are responsible for ensuring heat is a consideration in every relevant policy or program. There are tens of thousands of large and small cities, large and small towns across the United States. Not everyone is going to be positioned to have the right model to have an entire office in local government. But I still think it's possible in every city to designate a heat leader in the organization. So when people have questions, whether it's residents or people from within the organization, they know where to go. That has been very helpful for our experience in the city of Phoenix.
Good. Anybody else, either other panelists want to comment on that? What advice would you have for other cities that are struggling with heat and are looking for solutions? Any thoughts? If you don't, that's fine. But if you do, you're welcome to respond. No? Okay, good. Follow-up question again for Dr. Handula. How can the federal government better assist states in efforts to stand up these offices? As a recovering governor, I used to be governor of Delaware for 8 years, and I feel fortunate to serve in the Senate. I love being governor. And there's 14 of us here in the Senate who are former governors, and we're all part of the National Governors Association in those years. Part of the National Governors Association is the Center for Best Practices. Tommy Thompson and I were active in standing up when he was governor of Wisconsin. But the idea is that for states to have a forum, vehicle, if you will, to share ideas that work. And so I always hold that out there as a way for states to help one another, including transportation issues. But Dr. Handula, how can the federal government better assist states in efforts to stand up these offices? Any more thoughts that you have? Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Carper. I'd like to echo a sentiment we heard from Dr. Flannery that education is a really important role that the federal government can play in supporting resilience efforts at the local scale for heat or other hazards. And we've been really proud to work with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration as part of their efforts to coordinate cross-federal agency engagement on heat through the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. Phoenix has been proud to be one of 4 cities participating in a heat and equity pilot program where we are in dialogue on a regular basis with Las Vegas, Charleston, and Miami, learning about our experiences. We all have a different approach to heat. Heat manifests differently in our 4 different cities, and we have a different governance model as well. I think agencies like NOAA, like the CDC and others can be very helpful in building heat literacy at the local level, understanding the design vocabulary, the specifications. What is the difference between air temperature and surface temperature, for example? These are critical concepts that our local leaders need to have to ensure that our hazard mitigation plans are thoughtful and comprehensive in addressing heat, and that heat shows up in other planning processes and in the budget processes in a meaningful way to help our residents.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Another question, if I could, I don't mean to be picking on you, Dr. Hondulovic, but we'll give Mr. Parsons and Dr. Flannery a few more shots as well. But this summer's widespread extreme heat has been really staggering, including a month, as we talked earlier, of, I think, temperatures of over 110 degrees in your own city of Phoenix. Academic scientists affiliated with the World Weather Attribution found that the maximum heat experienced in July in the western United States would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. So my question of you, Dr. Hendula, is would you talk with us a bit about how climate change is affecting the work that you do in Phoenix to address extreme heat?
Thank you, Chairman Carper, for the question. In part, I think it created this job. I think one of the motivating factors for our mayor and city council to create the country's first local office focused on heat was our observation that temperatures have been rising in the Southwest and indeed all across the country, and that they are expected to continue to rise. Other motivating factors were the recognition that heat does have serious public health consequences, as my fellow witnesses have provided testimony regarding, and that there is this governance gap for heat. There's been too much ambiguity regarding where in the organization responsibility falls for managing heat. In the city of Phoenix, we see climate change and extreme heat as closely coupled topics. We hear from our residents all the time that they're concerned about how it has been getting warmer and what that means for the future. We hear stories about going outside, playing in the evenings in bare feet from residents who have been in Phoenix for multiple generations, but they say they don't see the same happening from their children today, and they're concerned about what the future looks like. So I think the projections of a warmer future are motivating our work very strongly every day. I'd argue that the work is already important. Even if projections were for a cooler future, we're still not doing a good enough job meeting the heat challenge today, but the fact that the projections are for a warmer future adds more motivation and a sense of urgency to our work.
All right, thank you. Dr. Flannery, if I could, another question of you. What more should the federal government do to help states prioritize the resiliency of our transportation infrastructure?
As I mentioned earlier, we still have a need for some fundamental research, and what I mean by that is understanding asset performance under a range of threats and a range of magnitudes. For example, how might a culvert perform under a rainfall event of some particular magnitude versus another? And also taking into consideration the age of the asset. So as we know, our infrastructure can be upwards of decades years old, and understanding how they may deteriorate or fail under different conditions, I think, is something that we still have a lot of need to better understand. Also, listening to some of the testimony about heat, some of the emerging research understanding sort of the deterioration of pavements under these increases in temperature is something that we still have yet to incorporate into our pavement management programs, and it could be something, again, fundamental research at places like Turner Fairbank and some of our university transportation centers would be very valuable.
All right, good. We've been talking about football here. I want to mention baseball a little bit. They have a term in baseball. It's called when a pitcher is holding the ball or releasing the ball in a certain way when making throwing a pitch. The pitcher can telegraph the pitch, and I'm going to telegraph a pitch. And I have a couple of questions to ask of y'all, but then I'm just going to give you the chance to maybe for a question you were not asked, maybe would like to have been asked, and just tell us what that question would be, and then answer it. So that's what probably we'll wrap up at right at the end. We've got a lot of competition going on with hearings here in the Senate today, and there's a large forum that's going on in the building right next to us, right here in the Capitol, on AI, major forum on AI. So they we're maybe hoping that a couple of other colleagues can join us, but there's a lot going on. That doesn't diminish at all the importance of this hearing, and so we're deeply grateful for your participation. Dr. Handula, your written testimony mentions the effect of electric vehicles on reducing heat intensity. I'm told that something like 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we're creating in this country come from the cars, trucks, and vans that we drive. Maybe another 25% come from our power plants that produce the electricity that we use, and maybe another 20% comes from manufacturing operations, asphalt, steel mills, and stuff like that. Would you just talk with us a little bit about the effect of electric vehicles on reducing heat intensity, please?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. Phoenix is very proud to be leading national efforts toward vehicle electrification. In fact, the term Electric Valley circulates in our local conversation in Phoenix because of the progress we've made. Separate from the greenhouse gas emissions that you noted, Chairman Carper, vehicles are also a very important part of the urban heat story because they directly emit waste heat into the environment. We've all had that experience of standing next to a car and feeling the heat radiating off of it. It's estimated that vehicles add up for 40% of all heat added to the urban environment from energy consumption. Other sources might include air conditioners, for example. So vehicles are a really important part of the story and why our cities are hotter than their surrounding areas. And if we can have vehicles that emit less waste heat, which electric vehicles would, we could potentially be achieving cooler cities in the future. We are certainly trying to make an effort to lead by example as a local government, converting our city's vehicle fleet to alternative fuel sources. We're making good progress doing so with our light-duty vehicles, and we're in the early stages of transitioning heavy-duty vehicles, including the bus fleet. And when we talk about resilience to extreme heat, having electric and other alternative fuel source heavy-duty vehicles that work well in the heat is still an area where we're looking for more market innovation. Our bus fleet transition plan includes plug-in battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. We're pursuing a complete transition to 100% zero-emission buses by 2040. We have been using federal funding to help with this transition, including more than $16 million in FTA, low and no emission grant funding as part of the BIL. And we are also appreciative of the new charging and fueling infrastructure grant program created in the BIL that will continue to expand the deployment of EV charging and other types of alternative fuel stations. The transition to alternative fuels can be a transition toward vehicles emitting less heat into our already hot cities. Thank you, Chairman.
You bet. Maybe one more for you, and then we'll give each of you to ask your own questions. Dr. Handula, what has been the biggest challenge you faced in trying to reduce shade deserts across the city of Phoenix?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. Eliminating and reducing these shade deserts is certainly a priority for our office. Of course, one of the challenges is simply the availability of resources to do so. Eliminating a shade desert requires more than just handing a tree to a person and hope that it will survive. We need to be very comprehensive in thinking about the complete basket of strategies and solutions that can allow for more shade. So we're certainly appreciative of additional resources. The new urban and community forestry program, we hope will help us get there. We have a couple of large proposals in there. But I think the biggest challenge that we experience and other cities would experience is that there are locked-in legacy effects of previous infrastructure design that constrain where and how we can move forward. There are only so many places in the city that are easy to modify right now to add more shade, but the places where we really need shade require more significant overhaul of the streetscape, of our infrastructure systems, and of course, that becomes more expensive. We need to break those patterns that we've been locked into and be strategic and thoughtful how we do so, and we know that we'll be needing the federal government's assistance to get there in all of our underserved communities.
All right. Anybody on either of the other witnesses want to comment on that question? Either of you? All right. Okay, doke. Before we close, this is a chance for you to say maybe a question that you wish had been asked, but we're not, and then respond to that question. Dr. Flannery, would you lead us off?
Sure. One of the things I think that as an industry we're still struggling to understand is the right sizing of assets. And what I mean by that is, does it make sense to build your way out of some areas? In some ways, there may be areas in your system that might not make sense to reinvest in. It may make more sense to sort of move the facility or abandon the facility. I think there's still a lot of research to be done in that area and a lot of support to state agencies as they struggle with some of these areas that are challenging within their system that experience repeat damage. And understanding risk tolerance is also something that we as an industry could use help with. So those are things that I think FHWA and AASHTO and the Transportation Research Board could help with.
All right, thank you. Thanks very much. Mr. Parsons, please. Question, if we were sitting in the different seats and I was out there and you were asking the question, what question would you have asked?
So maybe two quick ones. So I would address something that's already been mentioned, but maybe expand on it. One of them is from my esteemed fellow witnesses here. I wrote a couple notes down for myself. We really need to work on interagency cooperation between all of our federal programs, federal highway, OSHA, EPA. A lot of times there's a punting back and forth on whose jurisdiction is what. We really need to work on better cooperation between those agencies for worker protection. So I think you brought up interagency cooperation. And along those same lines, another thing I wrote down was understanding of federal aid programs, especially in the era of IIJA, BIL, whatever you want to call it nowadays. We have an opportunity right now as a country to improve our roads, to prove our resiliency, and to prove our worker protections like no other. And there's a lot of money out there. We need to educate people on how to use that money, how to access that money, and how to level the playing field for employers alike. And then the other last thing I would like to, this whole one-size-fits-all, I agree. One size does not fit all across the country, especially when it pertains to heat. When it comes to heat, you're talking about relative humidities that are different temperatures, wind, personal protective equipment, type of work you do. But you need to have a fundamental ground that you start with when it comes to worker protections, such as water, rest, shade. So while it's not one size fits all, we have to do exposure assessments on our jobs. It's actually a requirement for the employer to do that across the country. They have to do exposure assessments for every hazard, including heat. So it's not one size fits all. It's an exposure assessment with fundamental core values and protocols to start with.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you. Dr. Handula.
Thank you, Chairman Carper. Perhaps two questions that might have been asked, or that I would be interested to ask somebody sitting in the seat. In the Phoenix area, there's been some mixed messaging in the media coverage of the Cool Pavement program, including a headline that cool pavement makes people hotter. So a question might be, why are there these conflicting messages in the media about the Cool Pavement program? And if I may take a moment just to explain the state of our understanding thus far
please do.
About Cool Pavement. So the reason that cities are pursuing or might consider pursuing Cool Pavement is that pavement is hot, and if we can make a hot surface less hot, that should produce a benefit in terms of cooling the city. But like every heat mitigation strategy, there is the potential for unintended consequences. If we plant a tree, for example, in the wrong place, it could disrupt above or below ground utilities, which could have the unintended disruption of service. With respect to Cool Pavement, what our experience in Phoenix has been is that because we are reflecting more solar energy away from the surface, a person who is standing directly above it on the road surface when the sun is out might experience more heat stress than over a traditional coating. The sunlight has to go somewhere, and if it's reflected into the human body, that could be adverse for the person standing on that street. This does not mean we shouldn't deploy Cool Pavement, but it means we need to be very strategic in where we're putting Cool Pavement, avoiding places like playgrounds or plazas where pedestrians tend to congregate. In our cities, there are thousands and thousands of miles of pavement where people are not congregating. Those are the places that make the most sense for a more reflective surface rather than these settings of congregation, if you will. That's how we've had this mixed messaging emerge in our media coverage of Cool Pavement in Phoenix. That was one question, and if I may entertain a second,
yes,
Chairman Carper, I think it could be argued that our cities and federal government are behind where we'd like to be in managing heat, and the question might be why is that the case? And I don't think we have adequately framed heat as a hazard like the others. As you and my fellow colleagues here have noted, heat is a very consequential hazard for Americans in terms of the public health impacts, accounting by most metrics for more deaths every year than most other hazards combined. Yet when we look at lists in notices of funding opportunities, here are the hazards and disasters you can apply for money for. Heat does not always appear on that list, and in fact, heat is not yet included in the Stafford Act that shapes how FEMA can issue its response and hazard mitigation money to communities. I don't think it's just a matter of getting the words heat in the acts. We need to think about the mechanisms, the evaluation, the processes that will provide the right resources to communities. But it would be a terrific first start if we could see extreme heat start to appear on lists along with all the other hazards that are so consequential for Americans. We know that heat is consequential as well.
Good. Good. I saw a couple of our witnesses nodding their head as you spoke there. Anything, y'all want to add anything to what Dr. Hundula just said? If you do, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is something that we definitely need to study further in highway infrastructure, understanding material performance, understanding asset performance under those stressors of extreme heat. It's an area that we haven't researched very extensively to date, and certainly something that we need to invest in.
All right, thank you. Mr. Parsons?
And I'll just say I concur with that last statement, that we need more funding and available funding for heat as a hazard for all the above, for occupationally, public health, resiliency. And then I forgot to mention that I loved your heat leader. In the construction world, we call that a competent person on a job site. But it's a heat leader. I wrote that down from your statements. So thank you.
All right, good. Thank you both. Okay, thank you all. Before I do a little bit of housekeeping, let me just say, when I have the privilege of representing Delaware, which is about 90 minutes away by train from Wilmington to Washington, so it's not all that hard. The trains start early in the morning and run into the night. So I've been able to represent Delaware and serve Delaware and live in Delaware and work here and go back and forth. Usually when I'm driving to the train station in the morning, I have an electric vehicle, and it's really great. It's great, a lot of fun to drive, but it also has a great music system. And it's one of those deals where you can play radio stations or whatever, but you can also make requests. And I asked my radio system, my music system rather, to play an appropriate song for today's hearing. We kicked off the hearing this morning. Senator Capito apparently is going to may well be informed later today with Lady Gaga, who's quite a star in her own right. But I asked my music system on my car to play a song called "The Heat Is On." The Heat Is On by Glenn Frey. Used to be one of the original Eagles. And the Heat Is On has been on for a while, and it's likely to continue to be on for a long while. And the question is, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And as it turns out, here in the Congress, with the support of the administration, we've done a lot about it. And I announced a couple of months ago that I'm not going to run for re-election next year. But I've reminded my colleagues and my constituents at home that I'm going to continue to serve in the Senate until high noon on January 3rd, 2025. So I'm going to be running through the tape and a lot of things that I want to still get done. And one of those is to continue to fully implement the provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, not just those that deal with roads, highways, bridges, ports and rail and so forth, but also the climate provisions there. I want to make sure that we have fully implemented the provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act that pertain to climate change. And I mentioned earlier that we can address climate change, including heat, in our state and all states across the country, including Arizona. But we can do it in a way that creates a lot of jobs and a lot of economic opportunity. If we're smart, we'll do both. And I'm not that smart, but I got really smart people around me, and a lot of smart people who serve on this committee. And our staffs, both on the majority and minority side, have looked across the country, find witnesses that are well suited to address this issue of heat, and they've come up with all of you and each of you, and we're grateful that you've joined us. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for imparting your wisdom and your thoughts to us today. Before we adjourn, a little bit of housekeeping. And we have a number of witnesses who hope, I think Senator Kelly's been trying to get him. He's in another hearing. I think Senator Markey's in another hearing, and there's this big forum that's going on AI, artificial intelligence. So a lot of people are participating in this morning. But that doesn't mean there's not a strong interest in continue to address the heat and the things that are causing the heat. And before we adjourn, a little bit of housekeeping. Senators may submit questions for the record until the close of business on Wednesday, September 27th. We will compile those questions, send them to each of you, to our witnesses, and we'll ask you to apply to us by Wednesday, October the 11th. I'm going to look over my shoulder and see from majority staff, minority staff, if there's anything else we're forgetting. All right. Well, in our business, I don't know what you call it, in our business at this point in time, we say it's a wrap. And WRAP. And we're, again, grateful for the work you do and for sharing your wisdom with all of us today. With that, this hearing is adjourned. Thanks so much.